It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Wisdom Wednesday with Professor Andrew Brandt back, which means class is in session. We are presented, of course, by DraftKings, America's #1 rated sportsbook app. It's Wednesday, which means we're already 2 days away from a Spread the Word winner, a sponsor confirmation email winner, a YouTube shout out winner, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod. So many good sponsors on the sponsor tab over at rosstucker.com, and make sure you are signed up to get my stories newsletter that I'm sending out next week. It's been a long time since I sent one out, but in there you will know how to win one of the last 3 Maddens, because I know a lot of you would still like one of those, which is awesome. There's a lot to get to, with yesterday being the trade deadline and even additional news on top of the trade deadline. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, so he joins us about every other week now, unless it's an emergency and we need him that week. You can check him out, as you should, on social media at Andrew Brandt. The Business of Sports podcast is fantastic. We'll get to that momentarily. And then, of course, you want to get his Sunday newsletter. It's really nice to get that into your inbox on Sunday mornings. Encourage you to do that as well. If you're following him on social media, he will post a link to that. Makes it pretty easy just to click on it and sign up. Andrew, there's a lot to get to. I guess I want to start, before I forget, with the not one but 2 Business of Sports podcasts that you did last week that got quite a bit of attention and were very timely with everything going on at the league meetings last week.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. The league meetings featured Roger Goodell answering questions about the investigation, or lack thereof, of the Washington football team over all those years. What people kind of didn't realize, or maybe even just kind of flushed away, you and I talked about it briefly. This summer, the report was ended. The investigation ended with a $10 million fine to the Washington team, transfer of ownership operations to Mrs. Daniel Snyder. And that was it. But what we now learn is it was an oral report. There's no written findings. And these women that were interviewed for 40 plus hours by the investigators, their stories were not heard. And that rubbed me the wrong way, as a lot of people, Ross. So I gave them a voice. First, the attorney representing those women, Lisa Banks, who again thought they were having a serious conversation with the attorney and her team, only to see an oral report and no record of the findings. And then, Ross, 3 or 4 of the women affected by working there reached out to me, and 2 could make the appointed time for our podcast. And they spoke about the experiences there. And again, I encourage people to listen. The 2 podcasts last week, things like being told to wear high heels and not flats, constantly being remarked upon how they looked, told to wear tight dresses, all those things, gave them a voice. And I just thought they needed that, because, Washington football team is not going to be open about that. And I think that's important. So yes, thanks for bringing it up. Those 2 podcasts last week before I did the rants this week.
So I guess I'm curious, Andrew, just to kind of wrap that up, what was your biggest takeaway from those 2 interviews, those 2 podcasts last week?
That attorney Beth Wilkinson, respected Washington attorney, did take it seriously, sat with these women, or her team, a lot of lawyers, sat with these women for hours and hours, asked serious questions, sat with the attorney. But at the moment of truth, the league wanted an oral report and no written record of findings. And this sticks with me, Ross, and I hope it'll stick with our listeners. We've had voluminous reports about deflated footballs. It was called the Wells Report. About the Ray Rice investigation, it was called the Mueller Report. We've had a report about Richie Incognito and Jonathan Martin. That was 110 pages, but no report here. Why? Why? The obvious answer is, if you're wondering what the answer is, this affects an owner, not a player. And I know a lot of players are wondering, that's unfair. So that sticks with me.
Wow. I guess the other question while we're on it was just sort of your reaction to the league meeting last week, where Roger Goodell said that he was satisfied with the punishment of Daniel Snyder, and the other owners either commented on it or said they didn't need to see a written report, really, other than Raiders owner Mark Davis. He was the only one that said, yeah, there should be a written report.
Yeah, he's the maverick like his dad. He's always sort of saying things the other owners don't want to hear. Yeah, I think that's the end of it for now. And I've talked about this before. You have too. We, media, fans, etc., will move on to the next drama. We've got plenty of drama this week. But as I noted, Congress has entered the chat. So the House Oversight Committee, they're interested in seeing more about this lack of written investigation. So while the NFL could ignore fans and media and lawyers, they probably can't ignore Congress. So this may not be the end of it.
I guess I'm curious about that. How does that happen? And like the House Oversight Committee, how does it happen that they have an interest, and what's their power? Like, what do they do? I don't know a lot about that.
Yeah, and I'm probably not an expert in it either, Ross. I just think that they're looking at it in their statement that this NFL has such an impact on people and young lives, and they're going to look into this. And the brazen nature of the Gruden emails also attracted their attention, that this has been going on a while and it's never been kind of snuffed out. What can they do? That's a good question. They can bring it into the light. That's, I guess, what they can do. And whether there's subpoenas and sanctions, we'll find out.
So another piece of major news to discuss involves the Raiders this morning, and it's horrible. Henry Ruggs III, he is last year's first-round pick. I believe he was number 12 overall, a 4-year fully guaranteed contract. We found out yesterday that he was involved very early Tuesday morning in a car crash that resulted in a death, and he's been charged with, I think, 2 felonies, DUI resulting in death, which is obviously absolutely horrible. And I got to tell you, I was surprised. I did a game last night, Andrew, and I hop in the car and I'm driving home and I see that the Raiders released Henry Ruggs. So I guess I'll start with that. I don't want to come across in any way as downplaying the gravity of the situation. I can assure you, I realize how horrible it is that a young person lost their life and how serious it is. But I guess I'm still surprised that the Raiders moved that swiftly to just outright release him in this situation. What was your reaction?
I think I have some of that too. This is so sensitive because we do have a lost life here. I don't know where to start. I mean, at the Packers, we did give guys a keychain that said, if you're impaired, call this number, we'll pick you up. Or we had a service, or even our own security people would pick them up. It was mixed results with that, Ross, because do we want, management knowing that a guy's drunk out there and had to be picked up, and they didn't trust that wouldn't get to our management? But of course, there's Ubers and everything else. And this was, there's no defense for what Henry Ruggs did. Now, the Raiders, could they have kept him on, gone through the commissioner exempt, having him sort of off the team, but paid? Yeah. And shown a little bit of compassion. But as you noted, they didn't. I think from a management point of view, they probably said, we just don't want to deal with this. We want to let him get on with his life and deal with the legalities elsewhere. I can see both sides. And my statement, greater talent equals greater tolerance. Like you said, 12th pick in the draft, one of the fastest players in the league. It's certainly a talented guy, but this goes beyond greater talent, greater tolerance with Ruggs. Yeah, obviously our heart goes out to the victim, but it sounds weird, but we hope for Ruggs' best too. I mean, his career's probably over, at least for a long time, and he's got to face this. And yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. I put out a tweet. What are the odds a month ago there'd be no John Gruden and Henry Ruggs on the Raiders? And I don't mean to make light of anything, but like you, it's such a sensitive topic.
Yeah, I mean, he's 22 years old. He clearly made a horrible, horrible mistake. And that's what's so scary about these situations. I mean, it's going to affect the rest of his life. Obviously, it's affecting the victim's life, the victim's family life, Henry Ruggs' family life. It's just so scary to see how so many things can change in in just an instant with one poor choice. But I guess, as we both said, it's a very sensitive topic, but it's hard to not think that, the Raiders just wanted to move on because of the mistake that he made. And yet it's hard on some level, I guess, Andrew, given that it was the same day as the trade deadline, to not juxtapose it at least a little bit with the Deshaun Watson situation. I'm not equating what Watson's been accused of with what happened with Ruggs, but certainly a stark contrast in how those organizations have handled those situations, because the Texans could have chosen to just release Deshaun Watson or move on from him because of the accusations against him, because Henry Ruggs is still also innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an awkward transition, but I said for weeks and months they're not trading Deshaun Watson. I said it earlier before all the charges came out because he was a great player and they just re-signed him. And I say it for the past 4 months because of what's come out about his charges, 22 civil, 10 criminal complaints against him. Not so much the Texans not wanting to trade him, but the other teams, like, who's going to trade for that and bring him into their community and tell their fan base, largely women, or at least hopefully a lot of women, look what we got. I think the most underreported story of the year in the NFL, Ross, is the fact that there's no clarity in Houston. They have this young star quarterback on their team and they're an epically bad offense, right? And they're not playing him. And we all sort of wink, wink. Yeah, he's got issues. They're going to pay him. Go. Like, no one has said this. Not the Texans, not the NFL, not Watson's representatives. It just kind of assumed that we all are just not looking, right? He's going to be there. He's told to shut up, stay away, and you'll get paid. It's just odd. It's just odd. I've said there's no way on God's green earth he's going to play this year, and we know that now. But it's just odd. We have no clarification from the league or the team about this double secret commissioner exemplis that seems to be happening.
Yeah, it certainly seems like they have some type of arrangement worked out. Trade deadline, as is often the case, Andrew, not very eventful, other than a pretty big trade involving Von Miller. Your thoughts on the trade deadline in general and Von Miller in particular?
Yeah, Ross did a deep dive on the podcast this week, but it's an interesting trade. Let's look at it from two sides. From the Rams side, they acquire another magnificent piece for their defense, along with Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Oh boy, they're going to be so great. They're all in, right? They are all in. They gave up a second and third. They have no draft picks next year except for a fifth and a seventh. They're going to, as I said, they're going to swoon at pictures of Matthew Stafford and Von Miller during the April weekend next year. You know me, I'm more conservative. I'm like, okay, they have no draft. Draft means infrastructure. Draft means depth. In 2023-24, who's backing up their stars? It's not going to be draft picks. So, I'm like, okay, all in's great, but what if you're all out in 4 years, 3 years? Someone's got to clean up that mess. The other thing about the Rams is I hope it works because Miller's a free agent and they got to have a plan. The part about the Broncos, they get rid of the most recognizable player on their team. They get a second and third, but they're paying $9 million of his 9.7. It's a Moneyball trade, which I like. So they're paying $9 million for a second and a third. Good value considering 4 years ago the Browns paid $16 million for Osweiler and got a second. So they pay $9 million, get a second and a third. I say good job by the Broncos.
Interesting, because they're getting better value for the money. I guess the flip side is it's an interesting message to send the locker room at 4-4.
Yeah.
But I suppose, Andrew, knowing who you are, self-evaluating is as important as anything, and they know that they're not good enough.
Yeah, I mean, there were some names on the market, supposedly, maybe Fletcher Cox in Philadelphia, that, you've got to deal with the locker room if that happens, like in Denver. But you know this better than I do. Players are resilient. If a guy's gone, they're like, yeah, maybe a day or two, like empathy. And then it's like the next game, the next practice, and an opportunity for someone else. You know that. Like this idea that players are going to mourn and come on.
Why do you think there wasn't more activity at the trade deadline? I mean, there's usually not a lot, but it feels like this year was especially pronounced because of the salary cap issues.
Yeah, I say it every year. I think it's less cap, but more, this again, football schematic. It's not like basketball, baseball, guys move in seamlessly. And even though they moved the trade deadline back a few years ago, I don't think now we got 17 games and we don't know if teams are buyers or sellers or contenders. And again, that giving up thing, it's not as pronounced. And teams are saying, like Deshaun Jackson, are saying, we'll just wait till you cut him, right? Like, we're not going to give you a seventh for Deshaun Jackson. Like, Houston got a seventh in 2024 for Mark Ingram. I mean, yeah. I mean, sometimes teams just wait, they'll cut him.
I guess the last thing, Andrew, that I wanted to ask you about, Odell Beckham Jr. Yesterday his dad's posting video of him open and Baker Mayfield not throwing him the ball. LeBron James tweets free OBJ, but he's still there. The trade deadline came and went. He's still there. Clearly, it's not a coincidence that his dad and LeBron did this the day of the trade deadline. What do you do now if you're the Browns?
Like we just talked about, you got to move on. He's got to move on. And this is all communication, from my vantage point, as I always say, it was always the agent. So I'd be talking to Odell's agent today from management. And then somebody's got to be talking to the player, whether it's coach or player development guy. Got to move past this. And the Browns are kind of teetering, as we know. They've lost a few games that maybe they should have won. And Odell's got to buy in. And they got to bring him in. And he's got his best buddy Landry there. So good luck to the Browns. I know they got a huge fan base, but they've got to turn it around with Beckham.
Check him out on social media for sure, at Andrew Brandt. That way you'll see every time the Business of Sports podcast is posted. Can't highly recommend it enough. Did a major deep dive this week on so many of the things we just touched on briefly. And then last week's episodes, extremely powerful, extremely important. And frankly, Andrew, seems like you're the only person in the media really willing to go there, really willing to give these women a voice. I don't want to say that other members of NFL media, so to speak, are afraid, but they're certainly not as willing to take it as far as you have.
Yeah, there's some things I see. I want to give people a voice. There are other areas I don't dive into that others do. I don't look at it as because I'm not an investigative reporter. I'm not a reporter, as you know. I don't use sources, but I use my insight and my experience to sort of bring out things. And like everything, right? I'll move on to the next thing. But for that week, I wanted to give the voice to the Washington football team employees.
Andrew, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, Ross, always a pleasure.
You know what's a pleasure for me? That I still have some hair, even though like 10 years ago, 10 years ago, my wedding day in 2006, when I look back on the videos and pictures, I can start to see that I was losing my hair a little bit. Thank goodness for Keeps. Look, there's 2 FDA approved medications that can prevent hair loss. There's only 2. Keeps offers both. And I've told you guys this before, and I've said it on other shows. I was actually taking both of these after talking to multiple doctors about it before Keeps even existed. I mean, I was taking these medications. One is a topical that you rub on the top of your head, your bald spot. The other one's a pill. It's so nice now not have to go to the doctor's office, get the prescription, then go pick it up at the pharmacy, or even have to go to the store to get the topical solution. I just get them both sent to me. Discreet packaging. I don't even know why it needs to be discreet packaging. I'm not like ashamed of it at all. And proven results. If I could give 26-year-old Ross Tucker any advice, it would have been to start these medicines a lot earlier than I did. And that's the exact same advice I would give all you guys. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/Ross to receive your first month of treatment for free. That's KEEPS.com/Ross to get your first month free. Keeps.com/Ross.
Tuck's Takes.
Hey, Ross. Good morning. I know you and Andrew obviously talked about Henry Ruggs. Anything else that you want to cover on this topic?
Well, I touched on it earlier. I guess I would just say, when you're 42 and your children are 8 and 9, you just look at it differently, I think. Henry Ruggs is a lot closer in age to my kids than he is to me. And I could be Henry Ruggs' dad. And I guess that's who I think about. I think about the family members of the victim. I think about the family members for Henry Ruggs and just how horrible that phone call must have been. And, obviously it's, I think, a wake-up call for anybody that ever has a few and then drives. It's not that we should need it. And I think the messaging in our society has gotten better and better over the years and people realize it. But it just seems like, these accidents still happen and they're just so preventable. It's heartbreaking.
Tuck's Takes.
As discussed, it was a relatively quiet trade deadline, but the Chiefs got edge rusher Melvin Ingram for the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 6th-round pick. Niners acquired D lineman Charles Omenihu. The Eagles traded for a 6th-rounder for cornerback Kerry Vincent. And the Jets traded tight end Daniel Brown for guard Laurent Duvernay-Tardif from the Chiefs.
Right. So, Melvin Ingram wanted out, and the Chiefs wanted more of an edge rush. They're obviously trying to get a spark for this year. So that makes sense. Omenihu's got some versatility on the D-line that the Niners felt like they needed. The Eagles have added like 3 or 4 young corners since the end of training camp. I mean, they are really looking for young corners that they can develop with Steven Nelson and Darius Slay not being young players at this stage of their careers. And then Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, just obviously we've had him on the show before, and absolutely awesome story is Laurent. And he wasn't playing in Kansas City. He approved the trade to the Jets, gives him a chance to play, I think.
Tuck's Takes.
As you and Andrew discussed as well, Odell Beckham Jr. clearly wants out of Cleveland, but he was not traded.
Right. I don't know how they're going to handle this. Not a big fan of Odell Beckham Jr. and the way he handled this, and he's handled his career. I tweeted this yesterday at Ross Tucker NFL. Just feels like the last couple of years in Cleveland have been similar to the last couple of years with the Giants. He's injured often. He's not very productive. He's not happy. He wants out. If everywhere you go it stinks, it might be you, is an expression I've heard. And the thing I don't like about it the most, I almost understand when guys are trying to get more money, but this guy just is looking for more catches. He's not looking for more money. And I also think it's sort of cowardly to have your dad post that video and then have LeBron tweet. Like, come out like a man and say that you want to trade or request a trade. Just seems a little cowardly to me the way he went about it.
Tuck's Takes.
Some other news include the Rams releasing Deshaun Jackson, Packers moving on from Jalen Smith after 2 games, Ravens linebacker Malik Harrison being hit in the leg by a stray bullet, and Titans signing running backs Deontay Foreman and Adrian Peterson while releasing linebacker Avery Williamson.
So evidently the Rams weren't able to trade Deshaun Jackson. I don't know where he's going to go, where he's got a better opportunity. I'll be curious to see where that goes. I mean, I'm sure he can go somewhere where he has a chance to get the ball more, but he had a chance to win a Super Bowl with the Rams. I mean, that's another guy right there that he's from Los Angeles. He's on maybe they're the number 1 team in my power rankings, but it's more important to him to play. And I guess I understand that, right? He wants to continue his career. If he doesn't get any playing time or have any catches this year, it'll be hard to continue his career. But wow, I wonder if he ends up regretting that, especially because if there's an injury, he would be right there. Jalen Smith, I think this goes to some of the excitement people had about him being signed. Clearly, he's not a guy the teams really want anymore. Malik Harrison, can you imagine being at a reportedly family gathering and you get hit in the leg by a stray bullet? I think sometimes a lot of us don't really understand where some of these guys are from and where they grew up. And then, yes, the Titans got a couple of big running backs now, Peterson and Foreman, to try to replace Derrick Henry, which the biggest running back shoes in the NFL to try to fill. Listen, don't try to drive this winter or even late fall without making sure your car is ready to go. That's why we've got these exclusive deals until November 7th with AutoZone Visibility Week. If your wipers are squeaking or streaking, that's a tongue twister, by the way. Gosh, I got tongue twister. I was trying to say tongue twister, and I said that. I got tongue twisted saying tongue twister. Squeaking, streaking, whatever. Get some Rain-X Quantum Wiper Blades. Join the AutoZone Rewards program. Get the Sylvania LED Fog Twin Pack. Just make sure your car is ready to go, okay? Like, don't be the person that don't get ahead of the game. The separation's in the preparation. Don't procrastinate and wait till it's too late. Ready to see more and drive safer? Visit your nearest AutoZone or head to AutoZone.com to start your job today. Get in the zone. AutoZone. Shout-outs are in order. They always are. By the way, we'll have Fantasy Feast podcast later today. And even if you're not really that into fantasy football, Joe has so much good information and stats for these players that I highly recommend you check it out. Shout outs, Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, Vision Comics with an X, HumanHeadNYC.com, and Steakhouse Sports DraftKings.com. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.